So tonight we're going to be talking small scale and backyard poultry. Go. All right. So I'm going to bring us through what you should consider before you get started, as well as, what your expectations should be when you first get your chickens to kind of give us the basics. So some of the biggest things you want to consider before you get started are your local code. So you're going to want to talk to your municipality, whether that be your town or village, something like that, and you're going to want to find who the code enforcement officer is there, and they're usually going to be the ones that can tell you whether you can own chickens at all, and any other regulations about how many or anything else you need to know. So sometimes you might encounter an education requirement or some type of variance or permitting that's needed, a license. It could be something you have to renew every year, just one time. And a lot of times you'll see different regulations about the distance your coop needs to be from your neighbors. Many places have a limit of 6 hens, which is the minimum you need to buy when you buy chickens in New York State. And a lot of places are not going to allow you to have roosters. So you want to make sure you know that in advance and have a plan for if you do end up with roosters, what you're going to do with them. Some other requirements you might come across would be things like floor space, of course, managing the odors, things like that. This website right here, underneath the map, General Code, is a good place to check that can help you find your local regulations. So make sure you start out with that before you get your birds. You'll also want to talk with your neighbors, make sure they know that you're getting some chickens, talk through things with them, be respectful of their property line, where you put your coop, where you're going to have the manure going, so manage those smells and things like that, and as well as having a plan for mortalities and how you're going to bury those to avoid any odors or other issues as well. So that brings us to when you have live birds, you inevitably have dead birds. So, prepare yourself for this reality. There's a lot of things that can kill chickens, unfortunately. There's a number of health things that we'll talk a little bit about later, but poultry veterinarians are very hard to come by in New York State. So you probably won't be able to find someone to see your chicken unless maybe if you're willing to pay a lot of money. We do have the Cornell poultry program where you can call and ask questions, but in general, you're going to need to be prepared to deal with a lot of things yourself, and potentially deal with, putting your chickens down or, culling them in the case that is something that you can't treat. Things like predators are going to happen. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but just preparing yourself for all of that. So that brings us to knowing your goals. So things are going to look a little different, whether you're doing this for fun or whether you actually want to turn a profit from this. Of course, you could do both. But one thing to be aware of is the timeline. So from the time you get your chicks to the time they actually start laying is going to be 21 to 24 weeks. And then after that, you can expect about 200 to 250 eggs a year for the first 3 to 5 years. And then you're going to see production decrease gradually after the first 2 years. So just being prepared for, making that decision when they start laying less, and just being prepared for what you're going to do with all of those eggs as well. So another thing to prepare for would be the manure. So be aware that one hen can produce about 45 pounds of manure a year. So have a plan for what you'd like to do with that. And even in the best case scenario where we're buying sexed chicks, you may end up with roosters. So think about what you're going to do with those unwanted roosters if you have too many or if you're not allowed to have them at all. So we'll talk from peep to egg. So when you do start looking around to buy, you can usually either buy your chicks straight run, which is going to be a mix of female and male, no guarantees how many of each you get generally, or you can buy them sexed. Again, that's still not 100% perfect, but usually you can guess they'll be at least 90% female, but it is a very difficult process to sex them when they're a day old. So be prepared again for some roosters. You can also skip that phase altogether and just get pullets that you know are female. Pullet is the word we use for hens under a year old. So you can get starter pullets that are fully feathered but not yet of laying age, or ready to lay pullets. So that would put them usually over 16 weeks, depending on the breed. You can also, of course, find someone that's selling hens that are already laying and start there. You'll also want to think about what breed you want. So do you want purebred? Do you want some kind of hybrid or mixture breed? Do you want to get something that's more of a commercial breed that's really focused on egg laying? Or do you want to get one of the heritage breeds that might lay a little less and take a little longer to start laying, but be, a certain type that you're interested in owning? One big thing to note, you don't need a rooster for your hens to lay eggs. So you don't have to have a rooster at all if you just want to buy hens. You'll still get eggs. So understanding the difference in breed and variety, the breed is going to be the type of chicken. So whether you have a Leghorn or a Plymouth Rock, that's going to be your breed. And then within that, you have different varieties that might be to do with the color of the feathering or color of or type of comb, things like that. So you might hear of like a Buff Orpington, for example, or a Barred Rock. Those are telling you the variety of those types of breeds. So these are a few samples here. This guide is one that people really like because it shows you the adult chicken or hen and the chick, as well as the eggs that it lays, so you can get an idea of what color and some more information from it. So that's one you can look up if you're trying to decide. And in general, when we talk about choosing a breed that's for laying, we want a breed that's above average laying. So of course, all hens are going to lay eggs, but some are really known for being layer breeds. We want something that's cold hardy, since we do have harsh winters, and we do want to keep these birds year round. A vigorous breed, early to moderate maturing, is going to give you eggs faster. And then of course you can choose based on which color they lay. So any, our normal brown and white to blue and green and Easter eggers and all of those colors. One common misconception is people think you can get kind of like rainbow all from one breed or from one bird. That one hen is going to lay basically the same color all the time. So there are Easter eggers where you might see some differences within the breed, but not within the individual hen. So where you can buy, probably one of the more common things would be to buy from a hatchery online. These are a few examples here. They ship them to the post office at a day old. You get them, the next day. So you'll need to buy at least 6, since we're in New York and that is the law. Alternatively, you can go to a local farm or look around on different Facebook pages for farms. You can go to your local agricultural stores, of course, Tractor Supply, Agway, Southern States. We always recommend, though, wherever you're going, to purchase chicks from an NPIP certified hatchery. So that's the National Poultry Improvement Program. And they're going to ensure that they are free of certain diseases and vaccinated and in good health. Another note, if you are ordering online and you receive those chicks in the mail, you want to dunk their beaks in water as soon as possible so that they understand where to go to drink. So brooding chicks. So a brooder is going to be the first thing you need if you're going to start with chicks. Since you don't, went too far. Since you don't have mama hen there to brood them, so it's going to keep them warm. So you're going to have something like this heat lamp you see here. You're going to start them at a temperature between 90 to 92, maybe a little warmer if you're doing this in the winter or when it's really cold outside. And then you're going to lower the temperature about 5 degrees each week thereafter for them to adjust slowly while they're feathering. We recommend having something that's more solid. So you'll see a lot of cardboard options out there. They're really flimsy. You want to make sure that the chicks are, going to stay in. They're escape artists. And you also ideally would have something with a cover like you see here to keep any predators out and to make sure that the heat lamp is really secure so that you don't end up with some kind of fire risk. So you'll make sure they have feed and water immediately and at all times in the brooding area. Keep it nice and dry, have some kind of bedding in there. And you want to account for about a half of a square foot of space for each chick. So this is a nice image that can help you determine by their behavior whether the heat lamp is, keeping the temperature too hot, too cold, or just right. So you want to see the chicks spaced out like we see with the yellow smiley faces here. So, kind of evenly spaced and comfortable, not huddled in the middle, not huddled in one area to the side, or, really spread out like they're too hot. But it is a good idea to have the thermometer at the level that the chicks are at so you can actually be sure of the temperature as well. But if you see them moving like this, that's a good indicator that something's off. So some more tips for brooding. Again, provide access to food and fresh water at all times. Make sure that the feeder size and settings are right so that everyone can get in there and have access, and none of the chicks are struggling to eat or competing too much. And make sure you're feeding a complete ration that's specific for chicks, so it's going to be higher in protein. You want to look for what's called a chick starter or grower diet for the first 18 weeks or so. And if they're not coming in vaccinated for coccidiosis, then you'll want to feed them medicated feed. And coccidiosis is something that is very commonly will take your chicks out. So it happens very fast. So we recommend either having them vaccinated, it's one of the things they can get at a day old, or feeding them the medicated feed for the first 8 to 12 weeks. But you don't want to do both. So make sure you know what you're getting. And we don't recommend feeding chicks homemade feed. If you do want to do that, it's better to start later when they're full grown. You can experiment with that. But in general, we recommend a complete ration to make sure that they're getting all of the nutrients, but it's especially important when they're first getting started, so you don't see any kind of developmental issues from nutrient deficiencies. So with pullets, again, that's your females that are under a year old. Most breeds are going to start laying at 5 to 8 months. And sometimes they'll need to be taught where to lay. So you can teach them by doing things like putting a golf ball or a fake egg in the nest. But one key point is the nest box should always be in a place that's, a little bit dark inside the coop. They like it to be a small, dark place where they can feel safe to lay. And then we get our full-grown laying hens. Again, average somewhere between 150 and 300 eggs, depending on the breed and the individual, which is going to drop off significantly after the first 2 years. You're also going to see a slowdown or potentially a complete stop in laying during the winter when the light amounts drop. So you can add supplemental light if you want to have them maintain production. It has to be about 15 hours of light total throughout the winter, but a lot of people just let them have that time to rest. So again, it kind of depends if you're just keeping them for yourself, or if you're really trying to turn a profit, then you may want to consider the light so you have that consistent supply of eggs. They're also going to molt every year or so that means they lose all of their feathers and grow new ones. It can be relatively fast, or sometimes it can take quite a while. And it does take a lot of their energy, and you want to make sure they have enough calcium at that time. That'll help them out. So Michelle's going to talk a lot more about, the cost of all of this, but some of the equipment you'll want to have on hand. And again, it's going to depend on where you're starting, whether you're starting with chicks or pullets or hens, but you'll need feeders, waters, heat lamps potentially if you're doing brooding, some kind of solid fence to keep them safe from predators and to keep them contained on your property. And inside the coop, you'll need some nesting boxes for them to lay. So we recommend about 1 box per 4 birds to make sure they have enough space. And you want them to be roughly 12 by 12 by 16. We'll show a picture of all the different creative things people use for that. And then you'll need to fill them with straw or some other kind of soft material or bedding. For those you do want to mount them above floor level for chickens, again, make sure you have enough for all of them and collect your eggs regularly to keep them clean and to keep them from getting broken. So these are some fun examples. A lot of people like to use things like buckets or crates, but you can use all types of things, or you can purchase, pre-made ones as well. But get creative, and you can use shavings, you can use straw. Some people like shredded paper. There's fake turf and different plastic type bedding materials you can use. So all kinds of things you can use for the nest boxes. Some specifics on what to feed. Ooh. All right. So as they grow, the amount of protein you'll want in the feed is going to change. So you'd see down at the bottom 20% for growers, then it goes down to 18, and then 15 to 18 for the layer ration. So that's going to change over time. The oyster shells are also important for layers, so that's going to provide calcium once they start laying to make sure your eggshells stay nice and solid. It might not be necessary when you're free ranging, but it's a good idea to offer it, and they'll take it if they need it. And grit is another helpful thing to have. It's for their gizzard, so that's kind of like their teeth to help grind up their food. So you can offer that. Again, it might not be necessary for free range birds because they can pick up things like pebbles for that. And then, of course, always have fresh, clean water available for them to have while they're eating. Things like scratch and scraps, you want to keep pretty minimal. So, of course, they'll eat lots of different vegetables and table scraps. They like different grains, but you don't want to keep that at too much more than 10 to 20% of their diet, or you actually can have some issues and things like obesity that cause issues with them laying. So some more feeding hints. Again, make sure you have the proper feeding size and enough space for everyone. You want to raise them as the birds get older to keep it at the right height. Keep fresh feed available at all times, but don't overfill or you'll end up seeing a lot of waste. So fill it about 2/3 full is a good amount. Every once in a while when you're going in to refill it, you don't want to leave all that leftover feed in there. It's better to remove it to make sure that you're not letting it get moldy. And then clean feeders and water containers regularly. Also, one question we get a lot, pastured poultry do still need to be fed a regular ration, so free range alone can't provide a complete diet for them. So keep an eye on that, and that's going to be a big indicator of their health and how they're eating. So importance of water. Water is kind of the forgotten nutrient. We want to keep it clean, keep it cool, make sure it's not turning into it, as this says, a soup of bacteria. During the summer months or times when they might be getting dehydrated, there are things like electrolytes specific to poultry that you can add, or different vitamins. Some people like to add apple cider vinegar for health, so those can be helpful as well. Housing, the biggest things are to keep it clean, keep it dry, and draft free. So you do want ventilation, but you don't want it to be drafty. You can do, of course, a more permanent coop or something mobile, especially if you're doing pastured birds. But the space requirements are usually at least 2 square feet per bird of indoor space, and then 4 feet in the run, and 8 inches for roosting on a perch. So again, adequate feed and water space, purchase and nest boxes that allow them to spread out and have their own space, and providing some kind of fenced in area or run where you can keep them safe and within your property, so that you don't have issues, again, with neighbors or predators, evil dogs, things like that. So this is just a little note on the difference in ventilation versus draft. So you do want some ventilation, around the roof line, or where the hot air is rising to get out in the coop, but you don't want these drafts that are bringing in cool air at bird level, especially in the winter. So you want all that excess moisture and everything to ventilate out, but you don't want a cold draft that's going to cause issues. So um, yeah, we want to keep ammonia levels low, keep the birds dry, and the floor of the pens dry as well. And that's really key to good air quality and health in the coop. As far as outdoor access, there's pros and cons. So most of you are probably planning to have your, if you're doing a backyard setting, some outdoor access. So of course that lets them forage and dust bathe, which is all natural behaviors. Can be healthy and good for animal welfare. Give them more space and sunlight and fresh air. The downside to this is things like predators and biosecurity issues, which Rich will touch a lot on later. Some things to consider. Again, I won't harp on this too much. I think Rich will talk a little bit about this too, but just making sure you're dealing with waste appropriately and not attracting lots of pests, because those can bring in different disease as well. And of course, it's something you don't want to attract to your house and your neighbors either. Some notes that you can't apply the manure directly as fertilizer, or it can burn your plants. So you want to compost it first. You can also, if you have way too much, consider giving it away or selling it, to neighbors, farms, putting it on Craigslist or Facebook or somewhere like that. But you do want to, make sure you're staying on top of it so you're not attracting any rodents or flies and bacterial issues around your birds. Another thing to be on top of is the way you store your feed. So making sure you don't have spilled feed that's attracting rodents, and making sure you're storing it in a way that nothing can get in, and that's staying nice and clean and dry. So this will be my last slide. Note on predators. Other animals like chicken too, unfortunately. So predators are always going to be an issue, even in backyard flocks. Some of the most common ones we see would be different canines, whether that's your neighbor's dogs or coyotes, foxes. Snakes, of course, can get mostly for the eggs, cats, possums, weasels, and then birds of prey will come, from above and take birds away. That's not all of them, but probably some of the more common. So we do have some good references here for figuring out what you might be dealing with based on what you're seeing, and how to protect well against different predators if you know what your biggest issues are. But things, of course, like a good fence, electric fencing can be really helpful. Using hardware cloth to seal up openings or cover your run. Having traps or a guard dog, of course, can be helpful too.
Okay, are people seeing my presentation now?
Looks good, Rich.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm going to be talking about incorporating biosecurity into your poultry enterprise. See if I can advance my slides. All right, so I didn't grow up on a farm, and at some point I decided I wanted to raise livestock, and it was all new to me. And when I first got started, that first year, I had a lot of beginner's luck. Everything seemed to be working. But after a few years, some things started to come off the rails a little bit. I'd like to call those beginner mistakes. And now that I do this professionally as an agricultural educator, I work with hundreds of different farmers. It's not uncommon for me to see what I would like to call beginner's luck. When someone first gets started, and then a few years later, they begin to really struggle with certain issues. Um, and then we kind of go off the rails or over the waterfall. And so I want to talk a little bit about this within the context of the disease triangle. So in order for us to have a disease occur on our farm, we need a host, which is really our chickens, right? And before you get started, there's no chickens there, so you don't have any animals to get sick, right? And more importantly, there's very few, if any, pathogens present because there haven't been chickens there before. And so you're working in a relatively disease-free area and in a very clean environment. Your chicken house and chicken yard has not been used yet. Uh, and when you step inside that coop, it smells nice, everything is clean. And then you start to get to work. And we have busy lives and we can't always get everything done in a really timely way. And if we don't keep up with enough of it, some things will start to build. And then, so a lot of my talk is to help prevent those things from happening. And Catherine started us off fantastically with talking about some of the basics of good quality production practices. And I'm going to be talking about how do we keep that going. And so back to the disease triangle here, we have the host. We want to make sure we keep that host, that chicken healthy with proper nutrition, remove the stressors. We don't want to being harassed by predators, even if they are just running on the outside. We want them to develop a very strong immune system, and they can do that with a good nutrition, a good environment, proper feed. And then we want to keep the pathogens away from our farm. And that's most of what my portion of this talk will be about. Is we are going to start with the healthy, disease-free chickens. Catherine mentioned, let's make sure they're NPIP sourced, that the source flock is got good biosecurity and you're buying disease-free chickens to start with. And then we need to start thinking about implementing biosecurity practices now. At the poll at the beginning of tonight's discussion, many of you said this is going to be your first year. So you're ready to get going and you're going to be well prepared to protect what you're putting together based on some of the information that we're sharing here tonight. And then finally, that environment, you're going to want to make sure that environment is kept clean, well-ventilated housing, plentiful dry bedding, all those things that also that Catherine was talking about. And we don't want to overpopulate the system. One of the common things that I see people get derailed with is they're having a lot of great success with their first 6 chickens, and soon they realize they could easily sell the eggs from 30 chickens. And so they expand. And that might be, maybe your house will support that. Maybe you'll have to make some additions to make that happen. But you don't want to get ahead of yourself too much. You want to make sure that everything's in balance as you grow this beginning business. So biosecurity is basically the practices and protocols that you're going to implement to prevent the introduction of any diseases or spreading of diseases within your poultry operation or other animals or your own family that you are there. So what happens if you don't think about and act about biosecurity? You're going to have increased risks of diseases. You're going to have perhaps reduced production. You might start ending up with some dead chickens and a lot of heartbreak. And, if it's not fun to be struggling with these chickens that I'm sure you're going to, almost consider as part of your family when you first get started. So let's make sure that we implement the right biosecurity so that we keep things going well all the way through the first few years. And what precipitated this discussion tonight was really the highly pathogenic avian influenza, or the HPAI influenza, that's been with us since 2022. And here we can see a map, and it shows that New York is right now the hotspot. So this is all of the places that had uh, uh, documented cases of avian influenza in the last 30 days. New York's at the top of the list. On the right side of the screen, we can see the different counties in New York. These are all New York locations. And, I'm from Delaware County. And in the last 2 months, we've had 2 cases of this happening in Delaware County. One farm had 60 birds depopulated, and the other farm had 240 birds depopulated, which is really quite a heartbreaking thing to happen if it's happening to you. So let's arm ourselves with information and practices to keep that from happening on our farm. Also, maybe some of you have seen a few weeks ago, there was a statewide poultry disease webinar, and they talked about all the other diseases, not just highly pathogenic avian influenza. And so we have common diseases that are caused by viruses. The HPAI or avian influenza is one of them. We have diseases that are caused by bacteria. This particular animal in the lower left is suffering from salmonella. It's likely going to die from that. If we don't feed them correctly, this is going back to the question about what to feed our birds. If we don't get something, if we're missing something, the animals might suffer and have trouble. This is actually a riboflavin deficiency. And how do you make sure you have the right amount of riboflavin in your chicken feed? The best way is to source it from a place that really understands and produces specifically for chickens the feed. And then there's diseases that are parasites, such as lice, mites, and these two chicks in the lower right are suffering from coccidia, which is one of the diseases that Catherine had mentioned. All right, so how do diseases move around? There's different ways that they are transmitted. One is direct animal to animal, and that's through physical contact, coughing, sneezing, dust movement within the coop itself. There's fecal if they're ingesting fecal matters. We want to make sure that the feeders we're using, they can't poop in them, because if they're eating a little bit of poop, they might get sick. A disease might transfer to them through that. Coccidia is a classic disease that's transmitted in that way. Then there's venereal and utero, and this goes to purchasing your animals from an NPIP certified source because they're not going to have these diseases. If you go onto Craigslist and you just buy from someone that you don't really know what they're doing, you could be buying an animal that looks healthy, but if it produces and sits on some eggs, it could end up passing a disease that it has to those unborn chicks, and uh, uh, they may not even hatch. Then there's indirect equipment to animal, and this is one of the things that we're really responsible. Looking at the picture of the boot there with all the mud, and so this is equipment, needles if we're vaccinating animals, vehicles, worker traffic, the clothing we wear. And then there's vector borne, where we have insects, ticks, rodents, other wild birds bringing diseases in. So we want to make sure our systems are set up that we don't have those things happening. And one thing that's really important for us to understand is that we can get sick from our poultry. So there's actually two diagrams here on the left. It says how is it spreading, and this is specifically about HPAI, or the highly pathogenic avian influenza, or H5N1 bird flu. Poultry can give it to humans, and they're getting it from the wild birds, especially the migrating waterfowl. So we want to make sure we're aware of those things. But the diagram on the right-hand side talks about the different ways that we could get sick from our chickens. So we want to make sure that we're always washing our hands. And I'll be going through a lot of the things that if you implement them, you're going to protect your birds, and you're also going to be protecting yourself from any possible diseases that you might get from them. Um, so there is a small risk, but we can easily mitigate and minimize that risk. All right, so the rest of my few minutes here, I'll be talking about biosecurity. There is a fantastic website called Defend the Flock, which is part of the USDA, and it works with the different educations institutions across the United States, including Cornell Cooperative Extension. So I'm going to be going through some of the resources that are found on that website. The website is listed at the top here, but if you just put in Defend the Flock into a search browser, you'll almost certainly find it. And it has a lot of fantastic resources. One of them is a flock resource page, and it has that link is there. It has 15 checklists, which I'll be going through in a moment. 16 graphics. So this green thing that says biosecurity is a team effort is one of the graphics. that you can get there. There's an online assessment tool that you can take about how you're planning on raising your chickens. There's videos, webinar recordings. There's wildlife management fact sheets. So if you're having problems with certain types of wildlife, there may be some fact sheets there that'll help you find a way to minimize that as a risk. And there's links to flock partner material, such as the Center for Disease Control, those two graphics that I showed you just a slide ago. So it's a fantastic resource. And I'll be going through specifically the biosecurity information that's on there. And so this particular graphic here talks about some basic tips. One of them is to always practice good biosecurity. So there's 14 NPIP. They've put this into 15 on their website. You want to always wash your hands after you've been working with your chickens with soap and water. Say the ABCs, make sure we're not going to uh, bring anything into our homes. Protect yourself. It's unbelievable how many people want to kiss and cuddle their chickens. Do not do that. Um, Protect your poultry, put control programs in place. I'll be giving some of those. Monitor your flock's health, maybe even write things on the calendar. If you see something unusual, put it on your calendar and then you'll have a record of it. Or maybe you'll have a specific spreadsheet or record book that you'll be keeping your records on. And then if you do have sick birds, reach out. You can reach out to any of your extension agents. We'll certainly want to help you. But if it's a serious thing, we've all been trained how to assess calls that come in about sick birds. And if we think that it's avian influenza, we can help you take the next step and get that reported to the ag and markets or the USDA. All right. So there's 14 biosecurity principles that have been developed by the National Poultry Improvement Plan, or NPIP. Um, and you can see the logo there on the bottom left. And the Defend the Flock has used these 14 biosecurity principles to make 15 biosecurity checklists. So I'll just quickly work through those principles, and hopefully at the end of my presentation, you'll be able to go away with some very practical ideas of how you might want to set up your chicken raising activity so that you'll have some biosecurity in place and you'll minimize the chance of going over the waterfall, and you'll maximize the chance of having a profitable, enjoyable, uh, uh, small chicken business. Okay, the first biosecurity principle is biosecurity responsibility. So you're going to want someone to be the coordinator. So most likely this is going to be the adult of the family, and you may want to have a written plan to write down your biosecurity ideas. There's a website listed here, poultrybiosecurity.org. It might seem a little overwhelming, but that's one of the places you can go to get an idea of what a biosecurity plan might look like. Basically, you're going to assess the risks. You're going to start addressing the biggest risks that you see on your farm first. You're going to focus on what you can control. There's a lot of things we can't control, so we just have to kind of accept them. But there's a lot of things that our choices, our behavior can actually have an impact on. And so that's where we want to start our focus. Involve all the people doing the work. So that includes, any other members of the family or children that are working with you, or neighbors or so forth. Train everyone that's going to be working with the uh, chickens, and periodically check in and make sure you're following the plan. And if you see something that you wrote that, hey, it's not really practical, see if there's something that you can do to make it more likely that you'll implement it and help keep your chicken raising operation safe. So then once you have a plan, you want to do some biosecurity training. You're going to train everyone involved. So this includes your children, your neighbors' children, if they're coming to help collect eggs, or the people that you might be hiring when you go on vacation to take care of your chickens while you're gone. And you're going to want to make sure that they understand how to contact the person who's responsible for all the biosecurity. They understand the perimeter buffer area and the line of separation. My next slide is going to talk about that. And then also how to actually perform all of the tasks, such as feeding or cleaning or collecting eggs or washing the eggs or anything else that's going to be there. Make sure that they understand all of those things. think about the visitors. A lot of us are very excited about our birds and we want to show them off. That may not be the best idea to just show them off without doing it in a very intentional way to make sure that we don't accidentally bring something that we don't want, a disease that we don't want to our flock. And then have a refresher training at least annually. Okay, so the next two things I put together called line of separation and the perimeter buffer area. And these things might seem a little bit like overkill, and they were certainly originally developed for large chicken operations. So if you look at that diagram in the bottom right, you can see there's a road there and parking for places, multiple buildings, and you can see some red lines. So those red lines are the line of separation, which is basically a line separating the poultry house and the enclosure from everything else. So that's an opportunity for us to change our behavior before we cross that line. But we can't do everything inside that building. So that's why we have a perimeter buffer area. So that's a zone outside of the poultry house, an enclosure that'll give you a space to work, but it's separate from the rest of the property. And you may have special rules about who can go into that perimeter buffer area. We don't want, everybody that walks past to be able to walk through the buffer area. We want them to be able to stay out of that because we want them to be able to do something a little bit different once they cross those lines. And the diagram at the bottom there on the left that shows, something where there's actually a physical line in the drawing. You come in on the right side, you're taking off your clothes, your boots, you swing over on the bench, you're putting on other clothing. That might be more than what we're going to do in our operations, but the idea of what's there, I think, is what's relevant. And is there some little aspect of that that we can somehow incorporate? So you're going to want to define your line of separation in your perimeter buffer area, have a drawing of these in the plan, and provide specific actionable items for people to do when they cross into those areas. This is the best way to keep unwanted diseases from our flock that we might bring in through our shoes, our tires on our vehicles, and so forth. All right, so here's a diagram that I have, and I'm going to try to show you how these things work. So in the upper right, you can see a picture of my poultry building. There's a small red building here, and then the white frame. I raise ducks, and so on the aerial photo, you can see the barn there, and you can see where the ducks are, and I'm drawing my line of separation there. So that's the I want to be very careful when I go into that. And then I'm going to think about what is my buffer area. And so that might be if I let my ducks out to roam and I give them a little area like that, this might be my perimeter buffer area. And I don't want other people to necessarily be walking in here. Or let me erase this and I'm going to show you something else. So this little building here, where you can see this small square rectangle, uh, that is a garage, and I have a set of boots there that anybody that comes in to the farm may I ask them to put them on before they go anywhere else on the farm. So the only place that these boots have been on is my actual property. And so if people are going to go and they're going to work with the ducks, uh, I might make my new perimeter buffer area something like this. So that's my perimeter buffer area. So if I'm coming from my house, uh, if I'm coming from my house, I walk down in here, I can come into the garage, switch into these boots and go and do whatever I'm doing with the ducks and come back, take off my boots, put on my other shoes and go out the door and go away. So that's kind of an example of how you could choose to put a perimeter buffer area in a line of separation and have some actionable item that you're going to do when you cross those. So hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of a complicated idea, and that's why I spent more time on this particular two biosecurity options. All right. Biosecurity principle number 5, personnel and visitors. You make sure they're using personal protective equipment, like I just described in the previous slide. Limit the number of visitors, but if you do have visitors, provide them personal protective equipment and ask them if they have their own poultry. If they've had poultry for 10 years, it might be great to have them come over. They have a lot of experience, right? They might want to share. Hopefully they'll recognize that, hey, what's your PPE? I don't want to bring anything unintentionally to you. So what you don't really want is to have people that have been who knows where coming and a lot of people going in and looking for eggs and so forth. That's the temptation, right? Is to share the excitement of our chickens, but let's do it in a way that makes sense. Get some boots like I did to help minimize that risk. And then don't share equipment with others. And if you do find that you do want to share some equipment with others, make sure you're thoroughly washing it with first with a detergent and then with a sanitizer to make sure there's nothing in that equipment. There's a lot of micro cracks in almost anything that we use, like a bucket or a shovel. So it's very difficult to fully sanitize them. So it takes some effort to make that happen. Wild birds, rodents, and insect control. We want to make sure that we don't have problems with those. So check to see if they're already present. Don't give them a free lunch. Make sure you're using secure things to store the feed in. Make sure your water supply is protected. We don't want uh, I'll be talking about water in another minute, and I'll explain more about that. And if you do have a rodent problem or something, you might want to consider trapping. So again, we're back at my poultry building here, and I have this nice wool, fence that's secure. I try to keep the birds out. And you can see I put a lot of effort and netting into that. But I discovered that birds started to come in through the gap here. So I had to find ways to stop those birds from coming into this area. And then, I have metal along the base of this hardware cloth that keeps rodents from digging in, but I didn't do it along the building. And you can see a little hole here. That's where a rat had found a way to come in from a different angle and get into this area, and then the rat could go into the door where the ducks are. So I had to get a trap. Maybe you can see I have a hard trap there and trap that. So my next project is to dig this out and put some hardware cloth there so I can stop that from happening. So that this is a common thing. You may not have a problem with it initially, but as soon as you do, you know, work to solve it. And, these critters out there, wild birds, rats, they're very persistent and they're going to try to find a way. So, it's not once and done. You have to keep your eyes open and constantly observing. Equipment and vehicles. Clean your equipment and vehicles. Now, this picture here, obviously, we're not going to do. We're not going to be scrubbing down all the tires of any vehicle that comes into the yard. But this is something that commercial operations do, particularly when they've had a problem. But we may be thinking about where the vehicles will drive. If I go and buy a bunch of bags of feed from a feed mill or a tractor supply store, and I come home and I don't want to just drive straight to my coop, jump out of my vehicle in the shoes that I was walking around inside the tractor supply with and grab the stuff and walk into the building, right? I'm going to unload outside my perimeter buffer area. I'm going to go in, put my boots on, and then reach across the perimeter buffer area and put them in. Bring that feed in. So that's the sort of thing that we can think about. Or if you were using the wheelbarrow to move manure around, clean that out thoroughly or have a second wheelbarrow before you put the bags of feed in it and you wheel that to where you're going. So these are the sorts of things that we want to think about and you could put them into your plan. Like, if I'm going to use a wheelbarrow, I use the blue wheelbarrow for moving feed. I use the black wheelbarrow for moving manure or soil bedding. Those are the sorts of things that you could put into your plan. Mortality disposal. Plan ahead, be prepared. At some point, chickens are going to die, and you're going to have to dispose of them properly. And this is something that is written into law. There are certain acceptable ways of disposing of dead animals. One is composting. Cornell has an excellent resource that talks about how to build a compost pile uh, to properly bury dead stock. You can bury them at least 6 feet deep, but you have to be very aware of the type of soil, the depth to water tape, excuse me, and so forth. The picture on the bottom right is actually an incinerator. Commercial operations have that. It's not an option for us, but I just wanted to show that. Collect the dead birds as soon as possible. Don't use the same equipment as used for feeding, and report any unusual mortality or illness. Nobody knows everything. Get a little bit of help. There's nothing to be ashamed of if you're having a problem. Reach out. Extension is there to help. And that's a great place to start if you're having any issues, is to call up your local extension office. Manure and litter management. Create a plan for using the bedding, for the used bedding and manure. It's going to be a fair amount of material, so have an idea of how much that's going to be. You should have some specific procedures in mind to account for transporting, storing, or using or composting both the soiled bedding and the new bedding that you're going to be using. Clean and disinfect any vehicle or equipment prior to use for removal of bedding. So that's like if you have a skid steer that you've been using to clean manure, just don't put feed in that and bring it, or the clean shavings and bring that to replace. Remove all the bedding and manure from the facility and do a complete cleaning and disinfection. That's going to be point number 15. Adding or replacing poultry. So a lot of things to think about here. Only purchase your birds from NPIP certified breeders, hatcheries, and dealers. Then you'll be starting with, much more likely, starting with disease-free stock. Confirm that the poultry you purchase is clean of disease. So if in person, you can look at the birds. Don't buy one that looks like it's a little bit off. Clean and disinfect any tools, cages before and after for transporting new birds. So if you're using a box, make sure it's a clean box. If you're using, a poultry, plastic poultry container, make sure it's been thoroughly cleaned and sanitized before using it, and then thoroughly clean and sanitize it as soon as you're done. If you're adding birds to existing birds, quarantine them, put them in a separate place for 30 days, observe them for things like sneezing, coughing, nasal discharge. After you put the birds together, check the existing birds for any signs of illness, because the new birds may have something in them, but their immune system is fine. They've dealt with it, but the existing birds may have never seen it before, and they might succumb to an illness. So it's a time of stress, and it's more likely that you're going to see something flare up at that point. To prevent bullying, don't add new birds to an existing flock until they're the same size. So in the lower right, you can see a picture here. Maybe that wasn't the best idea to put birds of two different ages together. Thoroughly clean, disinfect, and replace bedding. And when purchasing from hatcheries, consider the vaccines they may offer. You may have to pay an extra 10 cents or 25 cents to have each bird vaccinated for Merrick's. It's well worth your money to do that. And there's other vaccinations that you may be able to purchase as well. Number 11, water supplies. Use water from a well or a municipal system if possible. Don't allow your poultry to have access to ponds. This is a very good way to inadvertently expose your animals to the highly pathogenic avian influenza, especially if there were waterfowl that are using those ponds. Test your water periodically for bacteria. If you must use a risky water supply, see if there's some way that you can reduce the risk, and regularly clean those waters, scrub them, use some soap, because you get these biofilms that build up, and you want to get those completely and fully removed. Number 12, replacement litter and feed. Store the feed in closed bins. In the lower right, you can see that they have a nice bin for storing their feed in there. Be careful when moving feed and litter to your poultry building. You remember about your disinfected or dedicated clothing and boots. Clean up any spills, because as soon as there's a spill that you don't clean up, you're going to have something there to eat it, like a sparrow or a mouse or a rat. Keep bagged feeds above the floor and have a rodent control measures in place. And make sure your delivery of feed or litter minimizes the risks associated with transportation. I've already spoken a little bit about that. Reporting elevated or unusual mortality on the right, there's a whole list of things that you can kind of look for, and know when to worry. An occasional dead chicken, especially if you know why it happened, like a hawk took it, then you need to make sure the hawk doesn't take another one. But if you can't explain things and there's more than one dying, that's when you need to report and get help figuring out what's happening. Auditing, this is really something that mostly appropriate for NPIP member flocks that are much larger, but essentially go through your biosecurity plan annually, make sure you're following it, and the last one that I have here is cleaning and disinfecting your poultry enclosure. So this was actually included in one of the other NPIP 14 things, but the Defend the Flock has pulled this out because it's really an important thing that's often done with handwork. So we want to make sure that we're safe. Wear personal protective equipment. There's a lot of sicknesses you can get if you breathe in the air of while cleaning out any animal livestock building. So make sure you're wearing um, some sort of face mask, preferably an N95. Um, so you're going to want to remove all the litter. You're going to dry clean. So you're going to get as much of the organic matter out as you possibly can while it's dry. Then you're going to wet clean and you're going to be scrubbing, trying to get the last of that loosened and out. You're going to rinse everything with water, apply a disinfectant, leaving the enclosure empty until it's fully dry. Ideally, there'd be not just a few hours, but weeks between cleaning this out before you brought in the next group of birds that are new to your farm. Remove and discard your protective gear and wash your hands thoroughly. So I've just gone through a lot of stuff. I'll make my slides available to you. I'll send them. I have all of your emails, so I can send this out to you so you'll have it as a resource. You should feel free to contact me at any time. So with that, I will stop sharing and see if there's any questions.
So now I'm going to go ahead and talk about some numbers, right? That's everyone's favorite thing. Everyone wants to know, how much is this going to cost me to raise? Originally, we did put this budget together in response for a lot of calls that we got that people were wanting to buy their own chickens after going to the grocery store and seeing the cost of eggs. So we just kind of wanted to highlight, what it would look like for you. So this is a sample budget that a colleague of ours from Cornell Cooperative Extension in Lewis County, Michelle Ledoux, was nice enough to go on her Sunday and go to I believe it was Tractor Supply and just check out some numbers to give us a nice budget. So what I want you to do is to go to your local area or wherever your local, supply shop is, and you can plug in your own numbers or what you're going to purchase, or, what's going to be bought so you can understand how much everything can cost you as well. All right. So again, depending on what your goals for this operation is going to be, if this is, your backyard, you're going to do it regardless of what it costs. Uh, Great, no problem. Then this is something that you might not have to kind of stick to or detail so closely. But for those of us who are trying to either A, make a profit or B, break even, these are some numbers that you can use to figure out, either A, what you're going to be selling birds for or eggs or whatever it may be, or just what things will cost. So let me move this here so I can see. All right, so initial cost here, and I want to point out that there is one thing with chick cost, but I'll tell you in a second. So if you walk into Track Supply, you're buying again, like Catherine had mentioned, a minimum of 6 eggs. I mean, excuse me, 6 chicks. So you're looking at around $7 a chick, and that includes that vaccination for Marek's disease, which is nice. So your 6 chicks, you're looking around 42 bucks. Now I will say, if you're I love a good coupon. I love to shop around for the best price. I will say we just had a statewide survey program that we detailed and collected a lot of data from poultry producers around the state. And we did find that the price per chick is negligible versus the price of everything else, like feeding the chick. So you don't have to shop around too hard to get, your $6.50 chick versus your $7 chick. That's my main point. Equipment, we went through all this equipment, so each thing has some price. I notice I'm a little well, I guess Rich, Catherine, and I are kind of all in the same region. Well, we all are in the same region. But I find certain stores, as I get closer to the city, they are more expensive. Higher up you get in the state, less expensive. So, and then of course you have online. So you're looking at things like chick feeders, waterers, heat lamps, that starter feed, and you're going to need some kind of shavings at some point, whether you're doing brooding or for your chicken coop, whatever it may be. And these are not all-inclusive numbers. It's just to kind of give you a good base. But anything that you add into your own budget, please do. So ongoing feed costs, this is stuff that you can just plug in and do a little math on. So I've given you kind of a formula here. When we're looking at feed costs, we just pulled a 50-pound bag for layer feed for those 6 chicks. And that's going to be about 22 bucks a bag. And to feed those 6 chicks for that year, you're going to be purchasing about 11 bags total. Okay. Now, if you're purchasing organic feed or, something not from a big box store or something like that, your price would increase. So here's the math, and this is available online as well. You can see a lot of the hatcheries also let you know how feed efficient their birds are. You can find that in their resources or education areas on their websites. But we pulled these numbers here for these 6 chickens. They're gonna consume in total about 1.68 pounds per day in the winter and about 1.38 pounds per day in the summer. So, just for math's sake, I'm not gonna do the math, but I will tell you, you could just multiply, if you're getting 12 chickens, 24 chickens, 50 chickens, you can just kind of do the math to know how much feed you're gonna have to buy. Of course, additional equipment, a chicken coop, it can be anything you want, right? These coops, you don't have to purchase. You can be thrifty. You can find stuff. You saw all of those different coop options that Catherine detailed. One of my favorites there was, the Bug, the Mini Cooper, or no, it's not a Mini Cooper. What is it? Oh, a Volkswagen Bug that they made into a chicken coop. I always like that one. If you are thinking about selling eggs, egg cartons, you might want an egg basket to collect, all up to you. Fencing and protection, we went through all that already. Just know that for these, depending on your operation, you may need a, electric fence, you may want regular mesh fencing, hardware cloth, poultry netting, whatever it may be. But I just encourage you to have some kind of fencing and protection because predation is really, it's just one of the main factors of losing your birds. Now, knowing that you have purchased these birds, know that they're going to give you eggs and they're going to give you eggs every day. They rarely take some time off. And so either you're really good at making quiche or you won't need to do something with these eggs. So again, you're getting about 3.5 dozen eggs per week with those 6 chicks. Now, as an example, if you were to sell those eggs at $6.50 a dozen or higher, lower, whatever your feed costs are, you would be able to receive about 1,200 bucks per year from your egg sales. So that's if you're selling. So knowing those annual feed costs and what we can sell for the eggs, we can compare them. And so far, it looks like, you're doing all right. But remember that in our first year, we were buying a lot of stuff, right? So if you ever look at like a business plan, those first year or two, it's always in the red, right? So those initial costs are going to be about $1,500 compared to that $1,200 you're bringing in. So technically in that first year, you would be, not making any money from your chickens. But after that, depending on how your feed costs go, you could. So, all right. So that's just a quick budget. There are plenty of great other resources for budgets for poultry processing. I'll be happy to share those with you, Rich, and we can throw that in the email as well. Because I'm big on budgeting. I'm big on business planning and budgeting. But so if you are planning on selling eggs, or if that is your deal, there's a couple rules and regulations that I just wanted to go over and make sure everybody is aware of to know. So we always talk about quality begins in the coop. We talked about having enough nests for these birds to have a place to lay. Generally, one hole per box per 5 hens. You're going to want a minimum of at least 3 boxes. If you're seeing that your eggs are getting really dirty, put another box in there. Give them another space to lay. Maybe it's just not enough room and things are getting a little messy for them. So if adding another box to your coop can keep your eggs a little cleaner, it's less work for you in the end, right? Making sure that bedding is always fresh and clean. It's a less chance that your eggs will get dirty. So with these really dirty eggs, it is best to discard those, okay? Those do have a high bacterial load. And for those who aren't aware, eggs are very porous. So what they do is they can draw in contamination. So especially if you do kind of improper washing or they're extremely dirty, I have a great picture here in a couple, maybe the next slide here that I could show you how contamination can uh, infiltrate the egg. Here it is. All right. So we've all seen this range of eggs that we've picked up. If we have chickens, they can be very messy. Certain times a year, it's just dirtier. If they're newer, who knows why they're dirty, but in any case, it becomes our problem, right? If we're trying to sell them. So you're going to want to remove severely soiled eggs. You just can't physically clean them well enough to provide eggs to the public that are free of fecal matter or foreign material, right? It just would be physically impossible without breaking that egg. But this picture shows how bacteria or manure can infiltrate into the egg itself, and that is what can cause uh, food safety issues and sickness with the public, and that's something that we want to caution and be very good about understanding how to maintain food safety with everybody. So as you can see on the left here, these aren't so bad. A quick little scrub, it should be all right. But use your best judgment on providing free of manure or foreign materials on those eggs, okay? These, if you have chickens, inevitably you're gonna have a couple outliers here that that do like to lay not in their box, and inevitably you always find that many days, many days after, and usually a nice pile. So the good rule of thumb is don't keep the Easter eggs, right? Nobody knows when those eggs were laid. Are they fertile? Have they been there for weeks? Are they rotten? Whose eggs are they? You know, are they even your chickens? Who knows, right? So just, you know, be aware. Sometimes chickens, go a little rogue, right? So for anybody who is collecting eggs, and, providing them to the public, especially, you know, if it's for your own family, I still recommend that you follow these food safety recommendations, and regulations. Um, but especially if you are selling to the public, okay? So you're gonna need to collect, and refrigerate these. Best practice is to, you know, go out, um, once or twice a day, depending on how your chickens lay, and you'll begin to know, you know, if they lay in the morning, they lay in the afternoon, if, you know, you'll know how many eggs you're supposed to get, right? But especially collect them within that first day if you have roosters, because we do not want, the eggs to start the fertilization process and have, you know, red spots or blood spots. We don't want any of that. So, or fertilized eggs in general. Make sure that you store these eggs in the refrigerator. If you have any, if it's, you know, your own personal fridge, or, you know, the fridge on the farm or something, just make sure that in that fridge isn't anything with like a strong odor, onions, garlic, apples, potatoes. Um, uh, the egg will start to absorb these, I guess, smells, right? It'll pull it in. So you'll start to get kind of onion eggs. That has happened to me. I've had that happen, but, it is, just one thing I wanted to mention. Keep it away from onions, garlic, all those good things. Uh, in addition, we get a lot of calls and a lot of, discussion on washing or not washing. Again, if you are selling to the public, there is no regulation or law that says that you have to wash your eggs. What it does say is that they have to be free of manure and contamination, and well, no organic material on it, right? So nothing on it. It's got to look like a good clean egg. So that may mean that you have to wash. If it's looks like a clean egg, you don't have to wash it. So not washing will maintain that bloom or that kind of protective layer around the egg. And once you do wash that, it can remove that bloom. But again, removing the bloom is safer than getting someone sick. So obviously, if you're not washing, it takes a lot less time. So just do a good job checking over your eggs. You can always candle your eggs to see what's inside. And by candle it, you can put your phone up to it, flashlight, you can hold it up to a lamp, different things like that, to see if, you know, your eggs are in good condition. Again, consumers expect the best. You know, we see it, anywhere, even at the grocery store. You know, if we open a carton of eggs and we don't like what we see, we put it back, right? So just, you know, clean shells, no cracks, not like an ugly looking egg. Um, Consistent size is always, a good thing to do when you're, placing eggs into cartons, and good shape as well. So, you know, I spoke about this, but this is what we can't sell as far as eggs. Eggs that are dirty, anything that's cracked, moldy, any eggs that are developing fertile spots, or fertile eggs, blood, meat spots, and, any eggs that have anything else in them. So, as far as actual regulations for, selling eggs, besides, um, keeping them refrigerated and maintained at 45 degrees. Uh, your egg carton, and this can be done with either, you know, a little sticker, you know, that people put on. You can write on it, whatever it may be. But the words produced and packed by, following by the farm name, or farmer name and full address. Ideally, it is some type of contact information. It can be the, you know, address, phone number, email, those different ways are allowed. And the reason is to make sure that if someone should sick, or if a recall or something like that should need to happen, that we're able to trace back and find where it came from and prevent future illnesses, right? You have to label the carton with what is inside of it, which would be eggs. If it's not chicken eggs, you'll have to say duck eggs or quail or whatever it may be, and how many is in that carton as well. And don't forget your keep refrigerated statement. There is a great link here. This is from our Ag and Markets website, I believe, posted through one of our Cornell websites. But it does have all the instructions on what must be labeled on your carton. Egg selling tips. This is like, this I will scream from the rooftops. Make sure that your eggs are maintained and refrigerated. It shouldn't say below. It would be, that 45-degree refrigeration mark. This will have to happen the whole forever. How do I put this? For example, on the right-hand side, you see a cooler on the side of the road with eggs, right? Great. In that cooler, those eggs and that temperature should be about 45 degrees. So however that needs to happen, either with ice, cooling packs, either using an actual refrigerator, that's how those must be maintained. And even at farmers markets, especially at farmers markets too. So just if you're selling, just keep that food safety minimum temperature for your eggs.